So, yeah, as you noticed, it's not my laptop, so that was the first constraint today. So sometimes if I peek here, it's because it's not my laptop. Second thing is usually Evelyn will join me in this talk. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here, but I have one slide dedicated to her. We'll get into later. So today I'm going to start talking about bridging the design gap and a little bit about the book I'm writing with Evelyn and also with Fien. That can remove blockers to that flow. But first, I always want to talk about something outside IT and outside tech, and this was during Corona. And during Corona, I optimized my flow of doing groceries. Yes, because I didn't want to go too much into grocery shopping. I don't really like it, by the way. So what I actually did, while going to the same grocery shop, I went through all the aisles, and I remembered the context that where are the aisles in and where are the products in, right? And by doing that constantly, I optimized my flow that at home I could make a list in the order I was running through the aisle, right? So that's great. So every time I interacted with the grocery shop, that improved my model of the grocery shop, and I could basically figure out where certain products that were new to me would be roughly, right? So the problem is, this really worked well for me, but Evelyn, I already mentioned her, she lives in the south of the Netherlands, and the south of the Netherlands are really famous for their beers. It's not Heineken in the north, don't drink that please, more towards Belgium. She lives in Brabant, and you know, context changes everything. So if I would go to her grocery shop, yeah, that doesn't work anymore. And you might be wondering, where are you actually going with this grocery shop? Well, for me, software and organizations are similar, because if we have a stakeholder here that has sort of like this question, right? The takeout customer wants to know an accurate ETA before completing the order. Which team should they go to? Well, in this case, luckily the teams have proper names, like home deliveries, restaurants that give you a bit of context, instead of the Avenger team or the Pirates team. Please stop doing that. It doesn't give me context at all. Like going to the aisles in a grocery shop, right? This is the Avenger grocery aisle, and I'm like, what's in the Avengers grocery shop, right? So for me, context changes everything, and we need to give enough context to the people working with each other. Because in this case, you might as well think, well, they want to know an ETA, so it must be the home deliveries one. Well, if we deep dive a little bit more into, and this is a tool called user needs mapping, which is based on wordly mapping, it can tell a different story, where you can see all the way up here, where you can see the process of home delivery ordering, home delivery fulfillment, and in the end you see when does my delivery arrive, which is all in the home deliveries app. Only what you can see here is, the payment module is also somewhere in the takeout app, and also the delivery broker sits in the restaurant point of systems. How come? And this is actually speaking to you what's happening in that conversation with or what's happened in the history is that this company, it's a fake company by the way, but made up for workshop, but this fake company started as a restaurant business in a restaurant point of sales. And then they started doing takeouts. So of course that team took on the delivery brokery, and later on they created an app, introduced a new team. So if you start mapping the landscape, it starts speaking to you in a way what happened in the history, and that history gives you context, and that context will give the stakeholders more meaning. Because that question I asked before, if the stakeholder doesn't have that context, goes to the home delivery team, what do you think the home delivery team will do? They will implement it. This is Conway's law for you, and everyone who knows Conway's is that the way you communicate shapes the systems or designs the systems. But the thing is, with design, as I showed you here, everyone who communicates within an organization that is building software is actually designing the software. You can see it in here. The way, and this is a small example, right? The way this is designed is by the way the stakeholders also communicated towards the teams, right? And I've seen this happening in a lot of organizations where if the stakeholders are not aware of this, they will just go to the team that they think can build the system, and that team probably will build that thing, right? And that's what you get, all these quirky things in there. It will never be neat, right? So that's a given, right? The way we communicate always shapes the system. There's this team topology picture, right, where HR also helps shape the system because they shape the software, so they shape the architecture. right? But stakeholders do the same thing from top to bottom. So let's start with how do we actually want to organize design in a company, right? This is all about a given, right? The way the stakeholders communicate with the teams and the teams communicate with each other will shape the architecture in a way, and we want to map that out. But how do we actually want to organize that design in company? And Dan already talked about what's the demand. I use this model about Indy Young, and I'm not sure if you ever seen this model. It's a great model of how do you actually create opportunities and design products in your company. And he talks about, and people from the domain-driven design space or from other spaces love to talk about problem and solution spaces. This is the best example she ever gave me. She says you have a problem space, which is a person addresses the purpose with a variety of tools. What she means here is that a person, you can research that person, how they solve a problem outside using your problem. Yeah? And that creates opportunities in the opportunity backlog, and from that opportunities, from these user needs, as we say in worldly language, we can start creating solutions, which are actually propositions, right? Because many people address the same need in different solutions, right? That's why we have a Mac. That's why we have a Windows. They're all trying to solve the same needs. So they create products, and the products then get built. What I usually see happening in those organizations is that software design starts here. We start shaping the context, so that the way it's shaped here will shape the architecture. However, usually the teams will start somewhere over here. So what happens here is that these teams that are building the products usually only witness the product problems. For instance, when I go to a cinema and I want to buy tickets and I want to look at or buy a ticket and allocate a seat for myself, the developers might think, well, their problem is picking a seat. Well, that's not really a user need, right? I don't go to the cinema to actually pick a seat. I go to the cinema to get the best experience, which sits here. Selecting a seat sits here. This creates a problem because software developers then inside the company might address problems in a different way, which will shape the architecture even further, and we get a discrepancy to what users actually want and how we solve it. And John Cutler actually made a very good picture about this, what's happening. If we see at a lot of organizations how this is usually working, is that agile teams usually sits here. As you can see, agile able to release, right? They're building, they're testing, they might hand over to release. Hopefully that's not there anymore, but design as a team member. While where we want to go, if we give the proposition everyone's designing that communicates in the organization, we want to go to proper product teams. Meaning that opportunity selection that Indy is talking about also should be inside the team. Yeah? Because that shapes the architecture, and that's the way we want to stay agile, right? And that, having developers here, because there's one thing we say in domain-driven design, it's not the domain knowledge that goes to production, it's the assumption of the developer that goes to production, right? So if you're over here and other people are selecting the opportunities, do requirements planning, and hand it over to design, and then finally it comes into the team, they will make assumptions. That assumption will turn into architecture, and now you don't have an adaptable architecture anymore, because there's a discrepancy between the two. These are the blockers to flow. That's what you want to manage, and that's what, in a team topology book, they call that long-lived teams, right? We want long-lived teams to design, build, and run it. Right? DevOps were talking about you build it, you run it. We try to say you also design it. Meaning, you want to have the purpose, needs, and problems all the way up to the solution being owned by the team. And that creates a feedback loop. Yeah? So stream-aligned teams should aim to become product teams. And that's a very important thing, right? If we talk about autonomy, that also means teams should be able to pick their next opportunity. Okay. So, talking about that, now comes a new thing. You have engineers who's going to start talking to stakeholders, right? So you have now teams that are usually an analyst or usually a user designer or anyone else. They talk to the stakeholders or the product owner, right? As I say, at times there's a product owner, architect, UX designer, or other roles acting as an intermediate. We don't want to do that anymore. We still need these roles, by the way. It doesn't mean you get cancelled. I'm an architect, by the way. It doesn't mean you get cancelled. It's just we want to do it differently, right? So we have individuals or group either within or outside the organization who are invested in the outcome. They express their purpose, needs, and problem, and a team then starts building solutions for it. They design, build, and run, and that creates a feedback loop. The problem here is that there's a delayed feedback loop, right? Between the building and between the knowledge gained here. Now, what we need to create in between these stakeholders and a software team is a thing that within Crucial Conversation is a concept called pool of shared meaning. Who's heard of the pool of shared meaning of Crucial Conversations? Oh, well, it's a very nice book. It's below here. It's tools for stalking when stakes are high. Just so you know, when we're talking about opportunities, usually stakes are very high. So it's a brilliant book, but they talk about this pool of shared meaning, the sum of total knowledge, perspective, opinions, meaning, and feelings that participants in a conversation have regarding a topic at hand. Right? We want to create and nurture that pool of shared meaning between stakeholders and software teams. And the pool can vary in sizes, right? So by unblocking team flow, that requires to continuously cultivate that shared pool of meaning. It's not like you'd run one workshop and you're done. No, it needs to be a constant thing. And that thing only happens within the interaction that you have. So now we have developers usually adding that to the pool of shared meaning, but we also want to have stakeholders that project their market research, user research, or strategy within that pool of shared meaning, right? So that can become quite chaotic, as you can imagine, right? There's a lot of knowledge. Even me talking about that right now is a mouthful, as we say. And constantly there's a delayed feedback loop. But this thing, and I think Dan in the previous talk was also talking about bring the work towards the teams. In this case, we already make a preposition that there's a teams, but it doesn't have to be a team, right? It can also be a group of people. But you want to put these together and have a shared pool of meaning. And there's a lot that's going on in that pool, right? It can quickly become a whirlpool when navigating that problem space together, because now you have engineers that will probably talk in databases and tech changes, and then we have market researchers and UX designers talking in business language. That forms a bit of a... Who's had this before? Yeah. So that can be a problem, but that's also the way that the work is usually shaped towards developers, right? Usually, teams get fed with solutions. And to be honest, if I already get a solution to be built, I won't find my answers in the domain knowledge. I think, ooh, what does this new Kubernetes technology do? Because I need to have a challenge as an engineer. But there's a lot of challenges. We just need to bring the challenges to the teams. And fine, we can always use Kubernetes when needed, but bring the developers to the proper problem space is what we want to do in order to create the meaning for them. This is a thing within domain-driven design we talk a lot about, right? As software engineers, we want to let the domain drive it. The problem is we speak a lot of different languages. We have a lot of different tools, like within software, we have like UML, or we have C4 models nowadays, and that's not readable maybe for most of the stakeholders. And stakeholders also have their tools, and user researchers also have the tools. So we need to do something different. And that thing also came from domain-driven design. And actually the word didn't come from domain design, but we like to do collaborative modeling. Who's ever heard of collaborative modeling before? Event storming, wordly mapping, domain storytelling, a lot more hands. We all call these tools collaborative modeling. Why? Because in essence, they're very simple. The goal of a collaborative modeling session is not to learn the tool, is to express meaning towards each other. Have it visualized. And as we say in the book, it's a visualization technique So event storming, wordly mapping, we try to visualize the conversation, to analyze complex and conflict-laden decision-making processes with all relevant stakeholders and decision-makers to create a shared understanding. That's a mouthful, but it really means bring the people together, visualize the problem, especially complex problem, and create meaning from it. And that meaning, we from the domain-driven design community, try to do that with something called domain modeling. Meaning, we create certain domains from this collaborative modeling together with the stakeholders so that we can create that shared meaning of, okay, where are the aisles, right? It's a lot more complex than a grocery shop, an organization, but you can think of it in the same way, right? Where do I place what responsibility? And again, this is about the purpose of the problems and not the solution, right? So, a domain is something a lot of people think is very ambiguous, but a domain is actually an area of interest or an area over which a person has control. It's all about grouping concepts, and I like to use the very simplistic grocery metaphor, right? There's an aisle for your products here, there's an aisle for your products here. And, an organization is very complex. You can already see it in a grocery shop, which is less complex, that there's always this product that doesn't fit. Who's ever been to a grocery shop and you think, why is this product here again? Yeah, that's the same in organization, and that's the same when you do domain modeling, right? So some things don't fit correctly, but we need to make it fit for a while. Right, so we call this entire thing the problem space in domain-driven design, and we use this collaborative modeling like big picture event storming, put people together, let them model the entire business line, and start grouping these concepts together in subdomains. From using that collaborative modeling, we create that shared understanding of the domains. This is the thing you share with your stakeholders, so being there with your stakeholders, creating that shared pool of meaning, they also start to understand better, okay, which team might be involved where. Yeah? So it creates more of bring the work to the teams, and we understand better where do I need to go. And from there, we use collaborative modeling to use design activities. So now we're in the solution space, what Indy Young further called product design, right? So that also means UX, UI people should be with the teams, right? It should be a part of the teams, preferably inside the teams, together creating these solutions. And within domain-driven design, we like to call these bounded context, which I won't go into depth. But basically, if I want to slim it down, a bounded context is a specific language, a consistent language, with a model for a specific purpose. It's not something technical. It's a way to communicate these things together with your user and stakeholders, other people's possibility. And the way I describe it, it's the same as when you're switching countries or dialects, right? I know there's a dialect change or a language change when I, as a Dutch person, go to Germany. There are certain words that are the same, but I know they're different there. Domain-driven design, in essence, try to design that language together to create software. Yeah? And that's the goal of domain-driven design. It's a discipline rooted in the belief that creating good software systems for problems in a complex domain cannot be done without a deep understanding of the business problems you're trying to solve in the domain, right? And again, that means we need to bring engineers closer or as close to the opportunities, be involved during user research, because else they're probably gonna build the incorrect system. They're gonna bring the assumptions to production. So, this is a bit of a repetition, right? We share context, meaning, and categorize business needs, purpose, and problems. Through that, we design a language and model to solve complex business problems. Put the people together, design collaboratively together with these collaborative modeling tools, and create that meaning. Now, back a little bit, where would we put that user experience then? Well, first of all, as I said, bring user experience and user interface design in the teams. But now we have that user research, right? How do we cope with the user research? Because that's really something very complex. So I believe you can have it in two ways. Sometimes you hire user researchers, well, then you just collaborate or facilitate the teams to create that meaning. If you have user research designers in your company, try to put them maybe in complicated subsystem teams, but always in collaboration, sometimes as a service towards the teams, right? They're giving the teams the opportunities together with the teams. I so many times sat in teams where user designs, even already user designs, but not even user research, get put in the teams, like these pretty user journeys in the UI, and I'm like, okay, but this doesn't fit on my system anymore. Who's witnessed that? Gotta use, yeah. So the design that is created outside the team didn't fit the architecture that we build as a team. And we want to avoid that. We want to make it as a whole. Good, so bringing the people together, start doing collaborative modeling together, making it explicit. What could possibly go wrong? What do you think? Who wants to make a guess? What can go wrong? Well, the iceberg, right? So just putting people together is, in my opinion, you should always do this, the best possible way to do that. But there's this thing, and I won't go into depth about Freud, but I'm going to use their model called the conscious mind, the preconscious mind, and the unconscious mind, right? The analogy is very nice, right? Because we see, okay, nice, putting people together just works. Well, there's a lot of conflict going on during these collaborative modeling. And I witnessed that myself starting event storming. 8 years ago, I got trained into event storming, like, this is a good tool. Going to my company, put it together, and it totally went berserk. Because what's happening underneath that, and this is our model that we're using, is that there's a lot of shadows in the groups. So you can see the conscious part, right? Oh, when does that? And when you're with Dutch people, they always say Dutch people are more like straight, right? Yes, they're straight over there, but they won't talk about, how's my cat doing? I've been working in this for 10 years. I will just tell them how it is. I feel so stupid in this room. Who's ever had the feeling that they feel stupid in the room? Yeah. Right? And this is something we don't discuss. So just putting people into a room, there's a lot of these things going on in the shadows, right? And if we don't actively try to work with this, shadows, they will probably become demons and just like suck all the energy out of the room, right? It will explode. So we need to do something with this to create better decisions. So, what's happening? Human and their interactions, human and their interpersonal relationships, etc., etc. It's usually a human problem, right? We're usually not doing a lot with the human problem. Thinking like tools like, same with team topology, if you try to model with teams, there's a lot at play there. There's a lot of ranking going on there. And that's something we need to deal with. Dealing with humans is a hard work. Collaborative modeling, I always joke around, is very simple. I can do event storming alone and it will be a perfect collaborative modeling session. I do that, by the way, but it's also a type, but it's not very fruitful, right? Yeah, so there's a lot of things going on there in the shadows, something called ranking theory, meaning, right, we have the hierarchy that's there, like the explicit hierarchy, but it's also the hierarchy. I've talking a bit about the dungeon master before. Who's heard of the dungeon master pattern? So the dungeon master pattern is the person that built the current system, been there in the company for 10 years. That person might be a developer in a team, but they probably have one of the highest ranked in the company. So nice that I've seen managers join a company, try to change something towards that dungeon master, and then the manager got fired. Great that there's a hierarchy, but there's also an implicit hierarchy. We need to deal with that. We need to be aware of that. There's a lot of conflict and resistance going on there. Resistance is a weird word, by the way. Freud came up with resistance about people being in therapy, started to resist the therapy. And now we just say if someone else has a different opinion, we call that resistance. And that's a bit weird. Resistance is just another person's perception or opinion, right? For me, it's not resistance. We need to hear this out and let them feel heard. We have a lot of biases going on at play, and we have a lot of polarities in the room, right? Action versus planning. There's more of these polarities that are always underneath there. So a lot of problems exist because people are ignoring the socio in sociotechnical systems. It's already got mentioned before. And what's a sociotechnical system? In short, when you're in an organization, you have these 4 systems within a sociotechnical system, which the organization, it's the people, cognitive and social, it's the task, and it's the physical system. And to make something work, you want to improve all 4 at the same time. And that's what we're trying to do in collaborative modeling together, right? And as an example, I always give a very simple example of this. Who's worked in an open plan office? Who likes an open plan office? Yeah, that's usually because it's imposed on you. Some people like it, because of course, some people like an open plan office. But the original open plan office worked because they designed it together with the teams that are working in it. And that's because they optimize all 4 of them at the same time. If we just optimize one, it will go wrong, right? So collaborative modeling is really a socio-technical happening. Technical choices have social consequences and vice versa. So choosing a certain technology might increase a skill gap that needs to be managed, right? Defining boundaries of bounded context might imply team changes. Decision will most likely lead to resistance and conflicts. A decision will usually always lead to resistance and conflict. So we need to deal with this all the time. It's not like it's not there, right? You might think it's not there, but it's the same with design. Design is always there. So do you want to have good design or bad design? Those are your 2 options, actually, because there's always a design. And that's the same with these things. So lots of people in the room. The question would be, who's taking the lead? Who talks first? Who talks a lot? I usually do, by the way. Who isn't? That's why I'm facilitating nowadays. I talk less. Who isn't talking? Which subgroup emerged during the sessions? Are there a lot of discussions going on? Are people understanding each other? Who's moving stickies around? How much details is required in the session? How is the group handling decision making, right? As soon as it's easy to containerize teams to their technology because it makes these simpler. So putting all the people into a room, you need to deal with these things. And that's a fact. If you're not, there will be decisions being made anyway. And they're probably not the correct decisions. So who you're going to call? The catalyst facilitator, right? And no, that doesn't have to be a role or a person. That can be anyone. Anyone should be, just like anyone can be a leader inside a team, it's a property of the team or of a group of people. Anyone can be the facilitator. Sure, if I do a big picture event storming, I rather have a dedicated facilitator, not part of the group, that can help the group manage it. But if you're inside a team, anyone can be a facilitator. And to give you one catalyst that can help you in your next collaborative modeling session is that if you make a decision, and this is a lot of times not being asked, if there's a decision being made, being an authoritative decision, being a majority decision, ask to the group what they need to go along with this decision. This is so many times overlooked. Seven people out of 9 people in a group made a decision. Oh, fine, right? We can move on. But what about the other 2? And usually it's very simple. As an example, I've been into a conversation about should we stay in Git flow, should we move towards trunk-based development? 7 out of 9 choose trunk-based development. What do the 2 other people need? Well, they needed to know how to do that in a front-end system. So the decision was made, we go to trunk-based development. First, we're going to investigate how it is for a front-end team. Decision made, everyone happy. If we didn't do that, probably the decision started cycling around. A lot of these things are in our new book that's coming up that I'm writing with Gien and Evelyn, which is called Collaborative Software Design, how teams can really get all this inside the team using these collaborative modeling techniques. It will be out in a few months, hopefully. And I think I'm just in time in 7 seconds. And these are my cats. and else I couldn't come home. So thank you very much.